it's Bob Hedlund, and better late than never. I apologize to a number of friends back during COVID who reached out to me on social media and tagged me into this top 10 album challenge that was happening during COVID. Things were hectic, and I never responded, so I apologize to a whole number of friends that know I'm into music that tagged me on Facebook: Matt Hauber, Dave DiGiacomo. I mean, the list is endless, and I'm, again, just getting around to doing this 5 years later. Things have quieted down at work. I got one foot out the door. I thank my buddy Jeff Cummins for helping with some technical aspects of putting this together. So let's get right into it. My top 10 albums, but just by way of a little bit of background, as a kid, you know, I'd be in the back of the car, my mother would have AM radio on, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the stuff she listened to. There was a slow evolution of WRKO, AM Top 40. Some stuff started to kind of catch my interest, and I really think the turning point was working in a gas station at 15. The radio was on to WBZ-FM, which was an interesting taped format. And I started to get into FM radio, album cuts that they would play, and that really kind of grabbed me and led me down the path of really enjoying music and rock and roll. So let's get into my top 10. This was a big hit. I heard it on FM radio. Everybody knows Don't Fear the Reaper, you know, more cowbell. But hearing the opening strains of Don't Fear the Reaper was great. And then my good buddy, Mark Fish, who unfortunately passed away a few years back, handed me a cassette tape of the album Blue Oyster Cult, Agents of Fortune. So we're going to start off with that. That was one of my early introductions into rock and roll. It wasn't the first album I owned, but it was an early tape that I really enjoyed. Every single cut on this album. It really is a classic. Of course, everybody knows the big hit, Don't Fear the Reaper, but there's some tremendous songs on this thing, top to bottom. One interesting one is The Revenge of Vera Gemini, which opens up with Patti Smith doing some spoken word intro. And she was dating, I think, Albert Bouchard at the time, member of the band. So we're starting off with BOC, Agents of Fortune. I think it was 1975, 76. And by the way, it was a tough call because the follow-up album to this was Spectres. And I think that was the third concert I ever saw was Blue Oyster Cult on a Spectres tour. I had the flu. It was at the music hall, but I soldiered up and went to the show anyway in great pain. They had the laser show, and of course the big hit was Godzilla at that time. So Blue Oyster Cult. Now this one is interesting. Van Halen 1. This was one of the cuts that, a cut from this album that WBZ-FM was playing early on. The opening strains to Running with the Devil. Boom, 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 boom. And my grandmother, God bless her soul, gave me this very album that's in my hand for Christmas. I want to say Christmas of 77, possibly 78. Now, I don't think my grandmother looked at the liner notes when she purchased this and saw such cuts as Running with the Devil, but this was the fourth album I ever owned, and it was one of the early songs that grabbed me on WBZ-FM, working at Lincoln Street Mobile at the tender age of 15. Obviously a classic, everybody knows it. Very interesting. Aerosmith rocks. So I heard Last Child on the radio. What was the other cut on this? Oh, Back in the Saddle and Last Child were getting a lot of airplay on the radio, so you heard it in the background. But I remember going to a party on Levitt Street in Hingham, Gene Lofgren's house, junior year of high school, and a guy named Tim Carrigan had a boombox. Boomboxes weren't really popular back then. They came in a little later. But he was playing this tape, and I think that's the first time I heard the thing top to bottom. And wouldn't you know it, Mark Fish, my good friend, Mark Fish again, gave me, or we traded, and gave me the Aerosmith Rocks cassette tape. Later I purchased the CD, but a tremendous album top to bottom. Best Aerosmith album in my opinion. And you know, the Aerosmith dividing line for some of the old fans is pre-MTV, post-MTV. I don't like their Desmond Child post, MTV stuff. But this is a classic top to bottom, and I really love going to see Draw the Line, the Aerosmith tribute band, and they rely heavily on this album, of course. Tremendous album. Okay, there's a price tag on this one. You ready for this? $2.99. Molly Hatchet, Double Trouble Live. So Molly Hatchet's interesting for me. I was really heavily into Southern rock as a kid. We'll get to that later in this review. But Molly Hatchet, everybody knew Flirtin' with Disaster. I think it came out maybe my senior year in high school. It was okay, it was cool, but I never did a deep dive into Molly Hatchet. And then years later, I did purchase this album in a used record store. I was already heavily into Southern rock, but this is a double live album, top to bottom. I love every cut on it. You know, Leonard Skinner's you're gonna hear about Leonard Skinner later in this, but Molly Hatchet was just, in my opinion, in this album anyway, a little heavier. And I don't think Molly Hatchet got the credit that they deserved. They never had the success Skinner did, for instance, or even Marshall Tucker or the Allmans. But this album's phenomenal. And the interesting thing about this album, there's a cover of a John Hall song called Walk With You that only appears on this album. It's not on the later reissue CD. And on the album, they talk about two songs they play, Walk on the Side of the Angels and Walk With You. And they refer to them as new songs on an upcoming album. Well, the album never got published. Danny Joe Brown got sick. They lost their record contract, I believe. And you cannot even find Walk With You online. And I believe there's a publishing issue with John Hall, who wrote the original, and it's more of a mellow version, but the John Hall version's great. And some hardcore Molly Hatchet fans I have sparred with online that tell me that it's a horrible song. It doesn't sound like Molly Hatchet. It has horns in it, but it's an upbeat, uplifting, very positive relationship song about a guy meeting a woman in a bar, and he just wants to walk with her through life. I love it. And really, this album, in my opinion, was enhanced on my list many years later, starting in 2000, I believe in 2010, I got, 1999, I got to know the guys in Molly Hatchet. On 4 different occasions, I had the opportunity to enjoy some music talk, some libations with them, post Danny Joe Brown. Phil McCormick came into the band after Danny Joe Brown got sick. And I'll tell you, they took it to another level. I mean, some of the Danny Joe Brown stuff is great, but the Phil McCormick stuff is just as good. And hardcore Molly Hatchet fans diss on Phil McCormick, but I got to know Phil, great guy, probably one of the most interesting guys I've met through the years in my little rock and roll journey. So Molly Hatchet, Double Trouble Live makes the list. You are gonna see that live albums tend to be a little bit heavy here in my list. And that's because when I was younger, there was a band maybe I thought I liked, but I wasn't sure. And buying a live album that had all the hits was a way to kind of experience that band. And the late 70s into the 80s was heavy, heavy, heavy on live albums. I mean, any and every band had to do a live album, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. But that Molly Hatchet one is great. Here we go. People that know me know I am a big UFO fan. And I was just getting into music. I had my license. I got a tape deck, had a couple tapes. Obviously, the Aerosmith rocks. I mentioned that, the Blue Oyster Cult. But there was a guy in my homeroom throughout my high school days named John Goodrich. Get it? G-H. And he sat in front of me, and we got talking music one day, and he was a real audiophile. This guy had tons of albums. And one day he turns around in homeroom one morning, and he hands me a tape. And on one side was this album, UFO Lights Out. And I would say this album got played in my high school days more than any other. There was other side to the album, to the tape. Cheap Trick in Color was on the other side. That didn't make the list. It gets an honorable mention maybe, but sometimes I was in the mood and I would fast forward through Cheap Trick in Color just to replay as I'm cruising around town in my '69 Torino with the tape deck. Lights Out UFO really hooked me. And UFO never got the credit that they deserved, never was as big in the United States as they should have been. They were self-destructive. That's a whole nother chapter maybe someday we'll get into. But the UFO Lights Out, phenomenal album. The title track, Lights Out, was probably my favorite, but I enjoyed the whole thing, and it grew on me. I ran out, wouldn't you know it, UFO comes to town and opens up for Cheap Trick. How ironic is that? I got the tape with the two bands. UFO steals the show from Cheap Trick, completely blows Cheap Trick off the stage. I go back 8 months later, UFO's headlining, and UFO sounded like crap. They had a rough night, and Blackfoot stole the show from them. And it turns out, I learned later when I met Charlie Hargrove of Blackfoot, he told me the backstory on why they blew UFO off the stage. They couldn't find Paul Chapman, who had replaced Michael Schenker on lead guitar, and Blackfoot was told by the promoter to keep playing because they were searching the local bars around the Orpheum to find Paul Chapman, and it turned out the band was all banged up that night. The sound mix was sloppy and the band was sloppy. But UFO later, as you'll learn in this review, redeemed themselves. So Lights Out, UFO. This could be one of the most important albums on this list. It didn't make number one, but you'll hear more about UFO as we proceed. Just to prove that I'm not a hard rock heavy metal guy, a big influence on me growing up was WBCN. And WBCN was heavy on the new wave in the late 70s, my high school days. And one of the bands that grabbed me, and also John Goodrich also turned me on to it, was English mod, new wave, semi-punk band called The Jam. Now, The Jam didn't get their due in the United States the way they should have. There was always a rivalry amongst fans between The Clash and The Jam. Now, I bought Clash albums and Jam albums, but I preferred The Jam. They were heavily influenced by like The Who, bands like that. And it was a tough call because they have a lot of great albums. They didn't have a long enough run, in my opinion. But my favorite that really top to bottom that I like the best is Setting Suns. So my little new wave punk rock mod influence in this list is The Jam. Here's one that came a little later. This band is interesting. In the early 80s, I was out of high school. I was running the family business. I took over for my grandfather, Hedlund Motors in Quincy. There was a kid that hung around. I used to pay, he was a neighbor, a high school kid. I used to pay him to come in, empty the barrel, sweep the floors, and we got talking music. He was from England, and we jokingly referred to him as Larry London. And he was bitten by the new wave of British heavy metal bug that came into play in the early 1980s. Such bands as Iron Maiden, Saxon, Trespass, Diamond Head, even Def Leppard came out of that new wave of British heavy metal. They were influenced a little bit by Judas Priest, who was a little ahead of them. And he gave me a cassette one day. It was a Saxon cassette, and I didn't like it. It didn't catch me. I listened to it a couple times. I enjoyed one cut called Susie Hold On. I think it was the Wheels of Steel tape, and it didn't take. And then about 1999, I was in a used record shop, and I saw this album, Saxon, live. Here we go with the live stuff again, right? Saxon, The Eagle Has Landed Part 2. It was a follow-up to the Eagle Has Landed live album, and this one they came out in 1999. And I bought it on a whim, and this thing just blew me away. It heightened my love of heavy metal hard rock, love every cut on it, and some years later I had the opportunity to spend time with the band, and the lead guitarist, Doug Scarrett, who is still in the band to this day, was enjoying. They didn't have any beer on the bus. All they had was wine, and I was enjoying a glass of wine with them. And I told him this was my favorite Saxon album, and he looked at me and he said, "I am so honored to hear that. That's the first album I played on with this band." And it just, it hooked me into wanting to explore more of new wave of British heavy metal. I latched onto a band called Trespass. I have a greatest hits album of theirs. Some really good stuff that flew under my radar in the early 80s. So it wasn't until the late 90s that I kind of went back and did a dive into the new wave of British heavy metal. And I will say unequivocally, my favorite new wave of British heavy metal band is Saxon. I take them over Judas Priest. I take them over those other bands. And I don't consider Def Leppard new wave of British heavy metal anymore. They made a turn into kind of poppy rock, in my opinion. But I can't say enough about Saxon. They're still touring. I've had the opportunity, I think now, to see them like 5 times. Got to hang out with Biff. He's sort of my alter ego, in my opinion. If I were a musician, I would probably be channeling Biff Byford of Saxon right now. He's erudite, but he kind of lives the life of, being the heavy metal guy. At the same time, you can talk a lot of different subjects with him. He loves history. A lot of their songs lean into historical themes. So big props to Saxon. I almost wore my Saxon shirt today, but UFO is number 1 in my heart. And just to prove, we covered a little new wave of British heavy metal. We've covered classic rock. This one, Southside Johnny Hearts of Stone. This is, by the way, former Governor Charlie Baker's favorite album of all time. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. And again, I have to give props to John Goodrich. He handed me another tape one day. Southside Johnny on one side, Al Stewart on the other. And Al Stewart, very, very kind of adult contemporary pop, almost made this list. So it just shows you my breadth and my versatility when it comes to music. So Al Stewart gets a mention, but this album, top to bottom, there's some really mellow stuff on it. I think Southside wrote some stuff on this when he was depressed. There's a lot of relationship failure type songs on here, really sad stuff, a couple of uplifting songs, and there's a few songs on here that Springsteen either wrote and gave to him or he covered from Springsteen. The height of Southside Johnny's career, if anyone's going to give a listen to Southside Johnny, this is the one you got to listen to. I've seen Southside a million times, got to meet him. Whether or not I met him or not, this would have made the cut, but then getting to know the performer behind the albums on a personal level obviously enhances the experience, but can't say enough about this album. I think the one everyone might know would be Trapped Again. Springsteen wrote it. Just everything on here. I played The Fool, Hearts of Stone. Light Don't Shine. It's about the ending of a relationship. Kind of my theme song for my departure as mayor. Light Don't Shine No More. Southside Johnny, big thumbs up. And by the way, Springsteen almost made this list. I do like The Boss. I could do without his political rants lately. Another one that was influenced by WBZ-FM, but he gets an honorable mention. Down to the last 2. It was sort of a tough call, but not really. This next album is an all-time classic. You can Google this album and you will find people that are in the music business that will tell you this is one of 2, I say the best, hard rock live album of all time. It's a real live album, unlike Kiss Alive, where it was really done in the studio and they pumped some crowd music over it. This album I bought in high school. It remains one of the best of all time. It catches this band at its best. And unfortunately, the lead guitarist, who's probably the greatest hard rock guitarist of all time, in my opinion, even better than Eddie Van Halen, I'm talking Michael Schenker, an absolute genius. He bailed out as soon as this album was done. And if he had stayed with the band, I think UFO would have been propelled to great heights in the US, but Michael didn't like the overwhelming fame, success that this album was bringing them. This made them a headliner, but his departure knocked them back down. The band was self-destructive. I talked about them earlier. They were messed up for a Boston show. But UFO had a long career. They packed it in a few years ago. They had a 50-year run. All their albums, in my opinion, are really good. They've had 3 different phases of their, well, really 5 phases, but 3 major phases of their career. You got the Michael Schenker era, you got the Paul Chapman era, and you got the Vinnie Moore era, later years. Vinnie Moore ended up actually doing the longest run with UFO. But the Michael Schenker stuff is great. I love the Paul Chapman stuff. Equally, many fans will diss the Paul Chapman era, saying it's not UFO without Michael Schenker. I don't buy that at all. Phil Mogg was UFO, the songwriter, the lead singer, the one constant. This is a classic. I'm like an evangelical missionary for UFO. I tell people, check this album out. It's really good if you're into rock and roll. If you like the Van Halens of the world and all that classic rock from the 80s, 70s, this is a band to check out if you want to broaden your horizons. UFO. Strangers in the Night. Not to be confused with Frank Sinatra. Number 1. How do I explain this one? My tender young years still hadn't really been indoctrinated into rock and roll. I was in junior high school, and this kid in my school walked by me one day with a tour shirt. Timmy Bowen, nicknamed Bohana. He had a Leonard Skinner tour shirt on. I didn't know anything by Leonard Skinner. I just thought the tour shirt was cool. It was a baseball with an arm coming around the baseball with a handgun, which was their early logo, very politically incorrect nowadays. And I just remembered the shirt. It's like a kid, buying an Iron Maiden album. They bought it for the cover art, right? I saw the shirt, thought it was cool. Well, then I heard Sweet Home Alabama on the radio one day, and I'm like, oh, that's Leonard Skinner. So I didn't even own a stereo system. My mother had a big console thing, and there was a record shop not far. And me and my buddy Nick were in the record shop one day, and I decided to buy a couple albums. Took the plunge. And I bought 2 albums on my first visit. So I don't know to this day which one went on the register first. So this album was either the first or second album that I purchased. The other one, didn't make my list today, was Bachman Turner Overdrive Greatest Hits. You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Taking Care of Business. And they were fun to sing along because you knew the lyrics. I took the plunge on Leonard Skinner. I think I only knew Sweet Home Alabama. Maybe I knew Free Bird. But I bought the live album, not knowing many of the songs on here. And this thing blew me away. And shortly thereafter, my buddy Nick, I give him props. He said, hey, do you want to go see Leonard Skinner at the Cape Cod Coliseum? I said, well, how are we going to get there? I'd never been to a concert yet. His father drove us down, slept in the parking lot. We went to the show. And to this day, it remains my favorite live show of all time. I had never seen so much marijuana and alcohol and whiskey, Jack Daniels, in one place ever to this date. This was the late 70s. It was mayhem. The Cape Cod Coliseum was about 110 degrees, and Leonard Skinner came out. They were on fire. It was pre-plane crash. It was the original mainstay lineup, if you will. And we were so blown away. Not long after they announced that they were going to continue the tour, they would come to Boston Garden, and we made plans to buy tickets at Ticketron at Sears and Quincy. I went to the bus stop on a Monday morning, had money in my pocket. I get to the bus stop. My buddy Nick says, they're all dead. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, their plane crashed last night. I didn't believe him. I went to school not believing it, and everyone at school was talking about it. And obviously, we never got to see him that second time. I've obviously seen them since. I think the second show was 1993 at the Orpheum, which was in my top 10 also, and got to meet the band that night. But Leonard Skinner, One More from the Road, rounds out my top 10. First album I ever bought. I don't listen to it as much because I overplayed it as a kid. I know every note to every song, but this thing is ingrained in my soul, my brain, my heart. And I've read every book on the band, every documentary that's been out there. It remains very close. And a thrill for me in 93 and then in 95, I got to meet Adams Pyle. I got to meet Leon Wilkerson, the bass player, Billy Powell, Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother who helms the band now, Johnny Van Zant, and Gary Rossington and his wife. And that was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life, meeting the band. They were my childhood heroes. It was kind of surreal, but number 1. And I'm going to just round it out with a couple of honorable mentions I won't get into in detail. Shout out for the local guys. Second live concert I ever saw, Jay Giles. Me and my buddies played this one all through high school like there was no tomorrow. Blow your face out, Jay Giles. Springsteen, Darkness on the Edge of Town. WBZ had a tape format. Junior year of high school, I'd come out, get in my car, turn the ignition on at 2 o'clock. Badlands came on. I couldn't figure out why it came on at the same time every time. Then I realized they were doing a taped format, and sometimes the tape was queued up, that particular version, and I became a Springsteen fan. Al Stewart, mellow, but my buddy turned me on to it in high school. I've seen Al perform as recently as this year. I love his stuff. He writes a lot about history, more poppy, but I love it. Bob Seger, Live Bullet. Again, live album. This is an early album I bought. The reason I bought this album, an older guy moved into the neighborhood next door to me. The windows were open. He played this album every day, and I heard it through the window. And I would hear that song, Traveling Man, Beautiful Loser. That hooked me. Heavy music, Nutbush City Limits. And I eventually had to go out and buy it, and this was my go-to probably around junior year of high school. I don't play it as much. I do love Seger, but Seger's one of those bands that I go see him. It's a hit or miss for me depending upon the set list. But this album's phenomenal. It was my exposure to Seger. Seger's on the Mount Rushmore of American rock and roll composers, along with Springsteen and a couple others. But great album, Live Bullet. This almost made my list. Scorpions Worldwide Live. I don't have any Scorpions on here, but the Scorpions personally are one of my favorites. I bought this in the used record shop, the album version, which actually is framed right now at my house because it's autographed by all the members of the band. As fate would have it, through a weird set of circumstances, became friends with the band around 2002. Seen them 17 times, traveled with them, got to hang out with them. That obviously enhanced this, but this was my exposure to the Scorpions. Great, great hard rock, heavy metal band, all their classics on there. Got to give it a shout. Back to UFO. There's an honorable mention here. This is interesting. Hopefully I still have your attention. UFO kind of petered out in my mind a little bit. I forget when, maybe in the early 90s. I'm in a used record shop. I saw this. I said, what the heck is that? The guy showed it to me. I thought UFO had disbanded, which they had. Well, evidently Phil Mogg, and this is pre-internet, Phil Mogg rebooted the band. He got a great lineup. Lawrence Archer, who played with Phil in it. Some really great musicians. He threw an album together, which I didn't even know was out at the time I got this, called High Stakes and Dangerous Men. It only sold 30,000 copies, but Phil Mogg tells me that he's very proud of the album. It's really good. I bought that later, didn't know it existed, but I bought this. I didn't realize the band had rebooted. They were big in Japan. They did this album. I bought this. It has some of the cuts from High Stakes and some of their classics. And this thing blew me away. And I'm like, it resurrected UFO in my mind. It resurrected their career. And it just heightened my interest to another level in UFO and just solidified UFO in my mind and that whole genre of music. So this thing was, kind of like chapter 2 for me of UFO. Great album. I don't think it's sold. I don't think you can find it. If you find this online, it's big money, just because it didn't sell at the time, and UFO had kind of a resurrection. Probably the most current album on honorable mention, Outlaws, Southern Rock, Dixie Highway. I'll just say that this is the best Southern Rock album that has come out in probably the last 20 years. They're still touring. This thing's got some really country-ish sounding stuff, but it's got some really hard Southern rock on here. The Florida Guitar Army, Outlaws. The title track's phenomenal, Dixie Highway. There's a song on here called Southern Rock Will Never Die, name checks all the other Southern rock bands, what Southern rock bands like to do. Charlie Daniels did it, Almonds, all those bands used to do that. Great album, resurrected my interest in them, and I've seen them a couple times in recent years. They still sound great. Here's one that's not so great. It's the Scorpions' Unbreakable. It came out in, I think, 2002, 2003. There are like 3 or 4 really solid cuts on here. 2 outstanding cuts. Love 'Em or Leave 'Em, and what's the other one? I'm blanking out. Love 'Em or Leave 'Em, and Love 'Em, Deep and Dark. Deep and Dark's interesting. Matthias Jobs gets the songwriting credits on that. They were ready to kind of work him in for the songwriting credits. He'd been with the band a long time, so he made some publishing on that. There's a little bit of filler on here. It's a good album overall. There's some really good ones, as I said. Remember the Good Times has kind of a Beatles influence sound, different sound for them, very poppy. Beatles and Elvis were their big influence. Great band. should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because of their international following alone. They've done things that no other bands have done in terms of attendance, record sales, top 10 in 11 different countries at one time with Wind of Change, for instance. But the great thing about this album is the mayor of Weymouth, then state senator of Massachusetts, is in the liner notes. So I got to give it a shout out, Scorpions Unbreakable. That wraps it up. Glad I could make good on the challenge. I'm sorry it's 5 years late. I thank you everyone for tagging me on Facebook did that. This was a little bit long, but I hope you enjoyed it. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Jeff Cummins for helping me put this together. And as Phil Mogg would say, keep on rocking.